Stay or should I go?
Sue, your lighting is really weird. You're kind of,
My lighting.
no, Sue. I
Oh.
think that's Sue. I can hardly recognize her.
Well, you know it's me.
Yeah, that's you. Yeah. But you need some light somehow.
You don't need to look at me.
So, Anne, you can see at least your presentation, right?
Yeah, I can see my presentation. I've just managed to make everyone else disappear. I'm not sure. Oh, wait a minute. I see now. Wait, let's see. No, that
Well, it might be less distracting.
Oh, okay. I've got them now. Yeah, I think it's less distracting actually to do that.
Yeah.
But whether I can change it back again or not, I don't know.
Rob, that's a really nice picture you have.
Thanks. That's a Duke special.
Wow.
You
An official Duke one.
let me show you my picture. See?
All right.
Yeah.
Was that like last week?
That looks old, Brand.
Yeah, it's the mid.
20 years.
Yeah, I do. I can hear better.
How old is that, Brand?
18 years maybe.
Yeah. Everybody else disappear. How do you do that, Ann?
What? Am I making people disappear?
Oh, no, you're doing fine. I just thought, what a wonderful talent.
This is all new to me, how all these different buttons work. Let's see.
Hello, McGregor's.
Hello.
Sue, are you depressed?
Am I depressed? No, why?
Why are you sitting in the dark?
I'm not. I'm sitting in front of windows, and this house has a lot of windows.
Oh, I see. Oh, there you
That's
are.
better. That's better.
If you want me to sit on the floor,
Where you're facing dark, that would be great, because then we can actually see you, Sue.
That's good.
Much better.
except I have to sit on the floor to do it.
I'm sorry.
No, you can sit back in the dark. It's okay.
Thank you. I may just do that.
Okay, well, Anne, it's after 7 o'clock. The floor.
Okay.
Oh, somebody else is here.
All right.
So before I can get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everybody.
Bye.
Unmute Anne. Okay. You all ready?
Ready.
Okay.
Bye.
Right. Continue and then unmute Anne. Okay, so the only people unmuted is me and Anne. Go ahead, Anne.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight. I'm very excited to talk to you about some of the work I've done in my career today. And for those of you who at Solterra who see some new faces on the screen, these are my friends from Minnesota. So this is a great advantage of Zoom that I can talk to them as well.
Actually,
yeah, go on.
So if you guys have any comments or questions, you could either raise your hand. You should have a hand raised there, or if you go to the chat window, if you click on chat, then that's a great place to ask questions. And Anne,
yeah.
If you don't monitor chat, I can monitor it for you and just let you know what the questions are that come up.
I think that would be great. And if there are hands up that really need answering, can you tell me?
Right, we'll do.
Well, because I can't see everybody else at the moment.
So how long do you think you'd like to talk?
Well, I don't know. It might go 40 minutes or so, if that's okay.
40 minutes for the talk, and then we'll have a 20-minute QA. And Anne, are you a fan of The Clash?
I don't even know what that is.
Okay, great. Okay. Let's go on.
Okay. Okay, well, I have used some of my time sheltering to do a deep dive into my slide archives. And so I'll be showing you some various slides. These, as you can see in the first slide here, that's me in 1970 when I just arrived in Gombe. And then over on the right side, that's me there about in 2010. So I have been going to Africa for a long time to study chimpanzees. For most of my career, I've called myself a biologist, and more particularly a behavioral ecologist. I'm interested in how we can explain the great diversity of animal societies and social behavior in terms of ecology and evolutionary principles. And so in this context, I've studied both chimpanzees and lions. But then in the last 10 years or so, when I came to Duke, I came to the Department of Evolutionary Anthropology, And the mission of evolutionary anthropologists is to understand humans' place in the animal kingdom, how we are similar to other species, and how we are different, and how and why and when those great differences evolved through our evolutionary lineage. So in this context, chimpanzees are extremely relevant because, let's see, oh, I can't advance my slide, there we are. Because humans are among the great apes, so our closest living relatives are the other great apes, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos, which are another species of chimpanzee, which are rather different from chimps, but look quite similar. And if we look at this phylogenetic tree, where time is at the bottom and the present is, past time is at the bottom, present is at the top, we can look at the divergence times of these different species along our lineage. So orangutans, we last shared a common ancestor with orangutans roughly 13 million years ago. Gorillas diverged after that, and we share a common ancestor with chimpanzees and bonobos something like 6 to 8 million years ago. So by some people's reckoning, chimpanzees are actually more closely related to humans than they are to gorillas, which is very fascinating. So this makes the common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees something that we would love to know more about, to use as a kind of reference point to understand how things changed along our human lineage. A lot of people think that this common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees was really quite like a chimpanzee, so that if we can look at and understand the behavior of chimpanzees, this gives us a kind of reference point to think about human evolution and what changed along the way. This was, okay, so here's a map showing the distribution of the great apes currently. Orangutans only live in Indonesia, over here in the yellow and purple. Can you see my cursor, by the way? Can you see my arrow, Brand?
Yes, we can.
What?
We can see the cursor.
We can, okay, thank you. So all great apes only live in the equatorial part of the world because they all eat ripe fruit. They all need ripe fruit all year round, which occurs in basically tropical forests. Chimpanzees are shown here in the red. Black is mountain gorillas, blue is lowland gorillas, and then this tan color is where bonobos live. They only live south of the Congo River. Now, Louis Leakey, the paleoanthropologist, excavated human ancestors from 2 to 4 million or 2 to 3 million years ago in East Africa, and he became extremely interested in what we might be able to learn about the behavior of these ancestors of ours by studying modern-day chimpanzees. And so he sent Jane Goodall to a part of Africa where he knew that there were chimpanzees and where he thought it would be possible for her to study them. And this was Gombe National Park, which is here shown by the black star, which is on the eastern distribution of chimpanzees in Africa. But it was an area where he knew that it was possible that people could look at chimps quite readily. Here's some more maps to show you exactly where Gombe National Park is. It's in Tanzania on the eastern side of Lake Tanganyika. Here's Lake Tanganyika. And it's a narrow strip of land here shown, a very rugged area sandwiched between the lake and the top of a rift escarpment with mountains going off into Burundi and Rwanda. And this is what it looks like from the air. It's quite rugged. It rises 2,000 feet from the lake to the top of the mountains. And this is an area of distance of only about 2 miles. So very steep valleys. And the only way to get there is by boat. There are no roads. And Jane Goodall got there by boat, and we still get there by boat. This is from a visit I made a couple of years ago to visit my graduate students here, Joseph and Emily. It is the most beautiful lake. It's the longest lake in the world. It's the second deepest lake in the world after Lake Baikal. And it is a beautifully clear lake. It shelves very steeply down from a sandy or gravel beach. And it's a wonderful place to swim. It's where we swim every night after we've been running around in the hills studying the chimps. It's safe. When Jane was there, first got there were crocodiles and hippos, but now sadly they're not there anymore, but it does make it a pretty safe place to swim. It's quite a seasonal habitat. That in the dry season, it doesn't rain between May and September, October. And in the wet season, it rains a lot and it gets pretty green. Here again, you can see it's quite rugged, and you get very fit as you run around in these hills. This lake is extraordinary. It's like an inland sea. One of my colleagues took a picture of these water spouts quite recently. And sometimes the lake gets very rough. And every night the sun sets over the Congo Mountains here on the other side of the lake, about 30 miles away. And this provides a great setting for the end of the day for cocktails. And if we're not out in the forest watching the chimps go to bed, we quite often sit and watch the sunset across the lake. Well, now I'll give you a bit of history of the study when Jane started it, what she learned early on, and then how the research center grew, how I came to be there, and how our understanding of chimps has unfolded. When Jane arrived, very little was known about chimpanzees in the wild, and they were extremely shy of her. It was difficult to get anywhere near them. She sat on hillsides watching them through a telescope, but she was able to gain quite a lot of information about them. She heard them, she saw them going in small groups across the valleys. And in the first 3 months, she made some landmark discoveries which made everyone excited and allowed her the funds to continue her study. First of all, she discovered that they were not just vegetarians, but that they actively hunted and eat meat. Meat makes up about 3% of their diet. They also share meat. So this was really new to people. People didn't realize this before. So hunting, even in chimpanzees, and of course hunting becomes a very important thing during human evolution. An even more exciting discovery she made after about 3 months there was that she saw chimps not only using tools, but making them. They would strip leaves off twigs and then poke them into termite mounds, and the termites attach to the tool. They pull the tool out and eat it. So tool making was thought to be a hallmark of humans, but here were chimps making as well as using tools. Every night they make a new nest, so it's quite hard to know whether that they make a nest just wherever they happen to be. So it's difficult to know where to find chimps unless you actually know where they made their nest the night before. So it was exceedingly hard for her to get close to the chimps and photograph them, which was necessary really for people to believe what she was seeing. And Louis Leakey was very keen for a photographer to be able to get there to film these extraordinary discoveries. And she was helped by the fact that a chimp one day stole a banana from her camp. And so after that, she put bananas out in her camp, and then she set up a permanent feeding station where bananas were present every day, and the chimps came, ate bananas, and got very used to her presence. Now, this practice is now frowned upon because this is really interfering with the wild, the natural lives of the animals. And also we know that we can give them diseases by giving them food with viruses on them and so on. So this is no longer the accepted practice, but it was exceedingly useful for Jane because she was able to watch them at very close quarters and get to know the individuals. And so she really wowed the world with these pictures and films of chimps, which in some ways are so like us. They have very human-like gestures. They have close family bonds. And I'll show you a few slides to make these points. So this, once you start watching chimps for a while, you realize that they look as different from each other as people do. And this is David Greybeard, the chimp that Jane first saw using tools, the young female Fifi, who is about 5 years old here. This is Goliath, who was the most dominant male when Jane arrived at Gombe. Here he is very peacefully sitting with female and a couple of infants. But males are quite aggressive, and they jockey for power, and they do these big charging displays at each other, chase each other around. And the one with the best charging display manages to impress everybody else and become the alpha male. And after Jane set up her camp in Gombe, she had things like buckets, oil cans lying around, and this male, Mike, who had been a pretty low-ranking older male, figured out that if he dragged these around, they made a lot of noise and scared all the other males. And in this way, he used this smart behavior to impress the others and rise in rank. And the alpha male receives deference from all the other individuals in the group. They crouch, they bob, they give a pant grunt, which signifies submission. But they can be very calm and reassuring as well. So here's a female with her new infant greeting the alpha male. He's chucking her under the chin. There are many reassurance behaviors that we readily recognize. So here's adult male reassuring a young female. This expression with the bared teeth is not a smile. This is a fear grin. And so if you just, as an aside, if you see chimps being used in the entertainment industry, making that sort of face, they're actually terrified. They're not smiling. They're not happy. They hold each other when they're scared. These guys have heard some other chimps calling. They are calling and hanging on to each other for reassurance. And they groom each other as well. And only some will, that chimps will only allow some other individuals to groom sensitive areas like their faces. The kids play a lot, but sometimes adults play as well. These are two adult females tickling each other, laughing, and their laugh sounds quite a lot like ours. One way that they're extremely different from us is in their sexual behavior. The females have a sexual cycle that lasts about 36 days. And for 10 of those 36 days, they sport these huge sexual swellings where their rear end swells right up, goes very bright pink, very conspicuous. And during this time, they are ready to mate, and they are ready to mate with everyone. And they will approach males and present to them. Males are extremely interested in them. And females can mate as many as 50, 60 times a day. They mate with all the males. So it's a highly promiscuous society. Mating is public. It takes about 5 seconds. And then a female may go from male to male. So a very different kind of behavior from human behavior. The result of all that sex is infants, and females have an infant about every 5 years. Here is Melissa, a young female with her first infant. This is 1964, and this male is called Goblin. I studied him later on. He came eventually to be a well-known alpha male. And then here is the old female Flo that Jane described in great detail with her son Flint. She was a very loving and relaxed mother, and she had an older juvenile female, here's Flint, and an adolescent male, Figan. And there was another male who was a son who was even older, who they were all a close family, and even the males still spent some time with their mothers. So very close family bonds. Flint actually came to a sad end. Here's Flo. I took this picture just before she died, and he was 8 years old. She died. He stopped eating. He sat by his mother's body, and he died just 2 weeks later. This was, as we now know, pretty unusual for such an old juvenile, but he had had an excessively dependent relationship with her because she'd never really weaned him. So Jane realized very early on that there was a huge amount to learn about chimps, but that it was going to take a long time. And she set up a research center which grew in the 60s and 70s. She got her first field assistant in 63. In the late 60s, early 70s, there were graduate students and assistants from all over, from America and Europe. And from 1972 to 75, there was a program. Jane had she became a visiting professor at Stanford. She had a research relationship with one of the professors who was helping her raise grants. And they established a program where undergraduates from Stanford were able to come for 6 months to Gombe and help her with the work, which was an extraordinary opportunity for these students from the human biology program. I went to Gombe when I was 21 in 1970, and I stayed for 5 years, first as an assistant and then a graduate student. And what can I say? This was the 70s, and we had a lot of fun. In 1970, we started training local Tanzanians to help with the research, and they eventually really took over the study of the chimps for many years, and their sons are still the ones who are doing the daily observations of chimps. Here's Hilali. He worked at Gombe for 30 years. His son is now still working there. It was lucky that these people were so well trained in the early 70s, because it became a very politically unstable and unsafe place for white students for quite a long time, until the mid 80s, early 90s, when expats were able to go back to Gombe. Jane was able to keep it going through the work of these Tanzanian assistants. Well, my work when I went in 1970 was to work as an assistant to study maternal behavior. Jane was very interested in differences between females and how they raised their kids. So I spent a lot of time watching mothers and their small infants. But I became very interested in what happened to the juveniles, because mothers spend a lot of time by themselves, but at some point, males get really antsy to want to go and join the big males. And I also studied young females who stayed with mom longer, but eventually they went off on an even more surprising journey, as I'll tell you. This is Pom, a young female who eventually left the group and went somewhere else. The way we studied them was both at the feeding station, where it was easy to just sit and watch and record as the chimps, as they interacted, and record details of their behavior. But by the late 60s, people started following the chimps wherever they went, away from the feeding area, and following them up and down the hills, through the forest, to get a much better picture of how they behaved through their daily lives. This was in the 90s when I started going back to Gombe for short periods. Now, following chimps is really hard work and difficult. They sometimes stay on the path, as in this case, but frequently they don't. One of my colleagues took these pictures just a few years ago, where we have to sort of run down ravines, up ravines, with a chimp in front of us, just easily making its way through the undergrowth while we struggle behind. But it is possible in general to keep up with them and see what they're doing. So since the early 1970s, chimps, a single chimp has been followed every day, and we keep track of who the chimp is with, which other chimps, where they are on a map. Here's a map every 15 minutes. This is a map of each of the valleys in the park. And then the Tanzanian assistants keep a written description of all of the behavior that's going on and the behavior of the focal individual. And what I've spent a large part of the last few decades doing is getting this data into a digital form, having many teams of undergraduates typing it into the computer. And so because of this, we now have a big database where we can really look at patterns of behavior over long periods. Well, that's a lot of background about what we knew about chimps up to the early 1970s. Now, what I want to talk about is how our understanding of animal societies really developed in the early 1970s. By then, there were some studies of animals that were long enough that we could start to see how individuals spent their lives in and out of social groups. And I'll talk about this with reference to two species which were both studied. There are long-term studies on both these species at Gombe. So on the left are olive baboons, and then on the right, chimps. And during the 1970s, there was a real upheaval in thinking about social behavior. There was the growth of sociobiology, the selfish gene theory, and a huge interest in the kinds of social behavior and social bonds that animals have. So we were there at the ground floor watching these two different species of primates and beginning to figure out that although superficially these two societies look somewhat alike, in fact, they're very different. So the baboons started to be studied long-term just a few years after the chimps, and there was a succession of graduate students and then Tanzanian assistants who have kept track of quite a few groups of baboons in Gombe. And we tend to see always that baboons live in groups of several adult females and their infants, and then adult males. So the males are a lot bigger than females. The females have friendly relations with the males have friendly relations with the females, but the males are exceedingly competitive with each other. You get dominant struggles, and as in the chimps, there's a dominance hierarchy with generally an alpha male. But the baboons spend their time in permanent groups that you can generally see, or especially if they come down to the beach at Gombe, you can see the whole troop of baboons, maybe somewhere between 20 and 60 individuals. The chimps, however, were rather different, and it took actually a long time to understand if they even live in permanent groups and what kind of groups these were. When Jane first got to Gombe, she would see small groups of chimps wandering around. She'd also see lone chimps. When the feeding station was set up, there were about 60 individuals that came regularly to the feeding station. But Jane thought that they really all got on peacefully with all of the other chimps in the park, because when she was following them before she set up the feeding station, she would see the same individuals up in the north, up in the south, down the south of the park. And she felt it was all just one big dispersed, happy group that mostly got on well. And that the strongest bond, which she thought, was between mothers and their daughters. However, a series of events really changed our view of chimp society in the 1970s. And this came to be known as the 4-Year War. So this is kind of illustrated by social networks from 1970, 70, 71 to 72, which shows just the social associations of the males that visited the feeding area. So there were about 14 males. And here are some of the key players. Goliath, who was alpha when Jane first arrived, Mike, who became alpha male later on, and then Humphrey, who took over from him in the very early 70s. And then these two males, Hugh and Charlie, who had always been very submissive to Goliath and Mike, but not so much to Humphrey. So during these 2 years, it became obvious that there were two subgroups of males. These became more and more distinct. And Hugh and Charlie were down in the southern group. These two were in the northern group. Goliath ended up going south. And because we were following the chimps outside the feeding areas, well, we knew where these chimps were ranging. In 1971, they all shared the same general area. This shows the whole national park, shown by the black outline. Here is the range of the habituated chimps. But the two subgroups started separating, and then their meetings became increasingly intense. So this is a group of the northern males hearing the southern males come. They're all screaming at the tops of their voices. Then really shocking things, we started making observations where the males of the Casacala community group, subgroup found lone males from the southern subgroup, and they attacked them very viciously and left them for dead. So two were attacked and killed in 1974. Then Goliath, who had been the alpha male of everybody, he was attacked and killed, 75, as was an older female in this southern subgroup. And then in 1977, the last two remaining males of the Kahama group were killed. These were really vicious gang attacks. And what happened was that the males would patrol in groups the periphery of what we now understood was a territory, and they were wiping out their neighbors. So they expanded their community, their range a bit in 1978. But then in the early 80s, it became clear there were unhabituated communities on each side. We didn't know who these chimps were, but they were seen sometimes, and they were a powerful group on each side. They squeezed this remaining Casacala community. Some of their males disappeared and probably were killed. And at one point, Jane was worried that her whole community might get wiped out. But in fact, that didn't happen. The Cascala community was then able to increase their range again. We eventually habituated this northern community and were able to watch these very aggressive interactions between the two communities. So what became clear then from all of these observations is that in fact, chimps do live in permanent social groups, although they don't always spend time together. These are highly territorial groups, and the males defend the territory against males in other groups. It's kind of a primitive warfare, and and it can lead these encounters between groups can lead to death. Well, so chimps do live in permanent social groups, as do baboons. And they are similar in the sense that they each have multiple males, multiple females in them. But another pattern that became very clear in the 1970s was that the relationships between the individuals within these groups were very different, because we saw very different patterns of movement in and out of the groups in each species. So I'll talk first about baboons. As I said, they live in these permanent groups you see with males and females. This is Craig Packer, who was one of the Stanford undergraduates. He came in his senior year to go and be on his way to medical school, but his job was to follow the male baboons. And he started seeing behavior that got him so intrigued. In the end, he threw up the medical school and pursued behavioral ecology as his career. What he observed was that young males suddenly one day would leave the group they'd grown up in. He saw them sitting in trees gazing at other troops of baboons. And they were very nervous. Once there was a thunderstorm and the male fell right out of the tree. He was so shocked by the thunderbolt, but it was because he was in a high state of nerves. He was watching the next troop, and if he came closer to the next troop, the males would chase him, but the females really liked him. And so what happened was these males would try to join new groups. They get chased out by males, but sometimes they were able to join the new groups permanently. And Craig saw this behavior by a number of males. At the same time, I was watching female chimps and seeing similar kinds of behavior by female chimps. And so when the two communities were splitting in two, I was watching adolescent females who just started their big swellings like this. I was watching one female from each subgroup. And in each case, they were not particularly interested in the males that they'd grown up with, but they would go and join the males of the other subgroup. And at the same time, some new young females arrived in the chimp community that we'd never seen before. What both Craig and I found was that these new immigrants to the new group, met quite fierce resistance from the other individuals of their sex. So female chimps really don't like new females coming in, and they will chase them around and even attack them, just as male baboons attack new males coming in. But nevertheless, most of these individuals persisted and managed to settle in their new groups. So we were both able to look at the years of study that had led up to the times that we were at Gombe. And we were able to show that, Craig was able to show that during all of the years of observation, female baboons always stayed in the group they were born in. And they stayed there, and we now don't know they stay there for life. But amazingly, every single male leaves when he reaches adolescence. In the chimps, it's taken longer to really establish this, but now, because chimps take a long time to develop, they don't even reach those adolescents until they're about 13. They have their first baby at 15. So it takes a long time to keep track of individuals and see what happens to them. But we now know that males, chimps, stay all their lives in the group they were born, but females move around. And they join new groups, many of them, not all of them, before they start breeding. As we went back to write up our dissertations, other people were studying other species, and it became clear that these were very general patterns, what we call sex-biased dispersal, where in many species of mammals, it is the females who stay all their lives in their group, and males who move around. We call this female philopatry and male dispersal, sex-biased dispersal. But there are a few mammals in which, like chimps, the males all stay put and the females leave. So why do we see these patterns? If you think about growing up in a social group, you know everybody there, you know where the food is, and you know how to escape danger. You have friends, you have kin, and life is good. So why should anyone leave? Especially since they meet a lot of aggression in going into new groups. We think, and most people think, that this pattern of one sex or the other leaving is an inbreeding avoidance mechanism. We know that if animals mate with their close relatives, they're likely to have poor reproductive success. The infants are likely to die, or they may be sterile. And this is called inbreeding depression. And it happens because shared deleterious genes come together in the homozygous form. So if you mate with a close relative, if you have a rare but recessive and deleterious trait, and there's a likelihood your relative will as well. And so if you breed, the infant is likely to carry both that bad gene from both sides and do badly. So if all of the individuals of one sex leave, then they completely avoid inbreeding with their kin. And those who stay behind get mates from other groups. There are other reasons that individuals might leave as well, especially in the baboons, as I described, and the chimps. There's strong male competition, and males sometimes chase each other out of the groups. There's also a chance for males to find, especially it's advantageous for males to mate with as many females as possible, to have as many infants as possible, in a way that is really not true for females. Females just reproduce slowly, and that they're not limited by mates. What they're limited is by their resources and the food they can use to turn into offspring. So one way and another, it seemed we explained the pattern of males leaving in mammals on the basis of, given that one sex leaves to avoid inbreeding, we explain males leaving on the basis of male competition and maybe the advantages of finding more mates. So what's going on with chimps? To explain a little more about how we interpret chimp behavior, I'll tell you a little bit more about female behavior. As I said, when I was studying mothers and infants, they spent a lot of time alone. They're often alone with just their infant and their juvenile dependent young. And they may not meet any other chimps all day long. And we now know from this extensive following of individuals that we've done that each female has her own core area within the community range. So this, on this panel here, this shows the whole community territory. And then each colored line, it's rather looks like spaghetti, but each colored line is the core area, as we call it, of a different female. I've outlined some heavily here just to show that these core areas are quite small. So females spend most of their time just in the small part of the large community range. And some females hardly ever meet each other. And it turns out that some core areas have more food than others. This dark green means it's a nice evergreen forest, which always has fruit. The light areas are areas of grassland where there's less food. And we now know that there are rank differences between females. Highest ranked females tend to sit down in the bottoms of the valleys and keep other females out to some extent, whereas the low ranking females have to travel more widely and find food where they can. So females compete for food, they compete for good areas, they spend a lot of time alone, feeding alone, and we think that one of the reasons that they like to stay in just one area is that they get to know that area very well, and even in hard times, dry season when there's not much food around, they know where the small sources of food are. So there's a lot of good reason to stay in one area. So the females are all quite spread out. And because of that distribution of females, what do the males do? They're trying to gain access to as many females as possible. And what they do is to act together to defend a large community range that encompasses a range of many females. And they do this cooperatively. They keep other males out of that area. And if they're able to increase the territory size, they capture more territory, and eventually new females come and settle there. The larger the territory is, the more quickly the females reproduce. These are all things that we've discovered from long years of studying these chimps. So we think then that males benefit by cooperating with their kin and their group mates who they grew up with, who are good, sort of reliable cooperators, and they stay home and defend their home turf from other groups. Given that the males stay home, what's a female to do? If she stays home, she has her, and some females do. So this female, Fifi, stayed home with her mother. But a problem that all these females face, some more than others, is that they have relatives in their home group. So here's Fanny. This is actually Fifi's daughter. These are her two brothers who were both adult when she came of age. Her father, Goblin, was also still alive. Fanny actually did stay in her natal community, but she had to fight off her male relatives from mating with her. And this shows the mating in blue, mating attempts by her father and brothers, and mating attempts by males who are not related to her. The orange shows that she actually was able to mostly fight off her male relatives, and she tried to. She did not like to mate with her male relatives, but she mostly accepted the attempts of the non-relatives. So this female, Fanny, managed to stay home and avoid mating with her relatives. But we found now that a lot of other females, if they do have close male relatives, those male relatives, especially if they are the alpha male, quite often are able to force and mate with their sisters, even their mothers. They don't do this so much, but there's a real problem for females who stay home if they have brothers. So we had a hunch. So I'm now coming to my final question, which is the question I posed in my title, which is why it is that some females, especially at Gombe, do stay home while most females leave. And this is a rather busy slide, but it shows the results of 30 years of study where we have looked at what all the females who grew up in this Kasakela community over the last 30 years did, and also the females in Matumba for a short period of time. So if they're walking, these are females who left home. If they're sitting, these are females who stayed home. And what we suspected was that because of the advantages of having a high-ranking mom who is alive and who has a good home area, a good core area, if their mom's still alive, they are quite likely to stay home. And that's shown by the red here. So if their mom's alive and high-ranking, that's shown by this, this red color. If, on the other hand, their mom's dead, and especially if they have a bunch of up-and-coming or adult brothers in the community, they're most likely to leave. So the blue arrows show the number of, is proportional to the number of adult brothers they had in their natal community. And you might be able to kind of get the picture from looking at this busy picture that females with mothers who are still alive are more likely to stay home. So this graph plots the probability of leaving home. And this plots the mother's rank and her still being alive. So if the mother's still alive, and especially if she's high ranking, females are very likely to stay home. On the other hand, here's the probability of dispersal and the number of weaned maternal brothers they have at home. Females are much more likely to leave home if they have brothers there. So to summarize then, and this I should say is work by one of my fantastic graduate students, now a professor at NC State, who put together all of this information. And she actually followed this female flirt, who was Fifi's youngest daughter. She came of age after her mother had died. She had 4 brothers in the community, and she got out of there and went to Matumba. So then to summarize, chimpanzees have a pretty unusual social structure and social organization compared to most mammals. But the interesting thing is that if we look at human societies, especially modern human societies, traditional societies, we quite often, it's a pretty strong pattern for men to stay home, and especially in agricultural societies, they are the ones who own the land, and they stay home while the daughters and sisters leave and marry into other groups. And this pattern of females moving further than males is quite prevalent in many human societies. So perhaps we share that part of that as could be part of our heritage from a last common ancestor, where males stay home, defend a group range and group territory, and females move out. Oops. But there's quite a bit of debate about this because humans. Sorry, my son is calling me. Let's talk about it. For most of our history, we were not agricultural societies. We didn't farm. Excuse me just a sec. I'm going to talk to my son and then I'll be right back. Hey, Jonathan, can I call you back in a minute?
So if you all have any questions, go ahead and put it in chat and then I'll just read them off.
Okay. I'm back. So what I was going to say was that for most of our history, humans have been hunter-gatherers. They've not been agricultural. They have lived by hunting and gathering. And if we look at current hunter-gatherer societies, and there are of course very few left now, they tend to live in the margins of land where agriculture is not possible. But if I'm thinking about the San Bushmen, the Pygmies in Congo, some of the people living in the Amazon forest. Modern anthropologists who are studying those societies are quite divided about what the dispersal patterns are in those societies and whether it turns out that both men and women tend to move around. And so it's not entirely clear whether this pattern is typical of hunter-gatherers, and so perhaps it's something which has evolved again in recent human societies. So I will stop there. That's a source of controversy, and I'm very happy to take your questions. I need to figure out how to see you all.
So Anne, the first step, I think we've had a series of questions coming in through chat. I'm going to take those off, and then after we're done with the chat questions, we'll just open up the audio.
Okay.
Let's thank Anne by bringing up the applause symbol.
I'm trying to find you all so I can see you.
If you stop sharing, I'll stop sharing. And
can you stop sharing? Then I should see. Yeah.
Okay. So now.
Oh, I'm still not. Okay.
Okay. So I stopped your sharing. Oh, wait a second. Hold on. Share. Cancel.
Okay. Okay, great. I can see everyone. Great.
Okay, so the questions that come in. So from here, from Rob, to what extent does the following influence chimp behavior?
Yeah, that's a great question, of course. And it's a little bit hard to know, isn't it? Because if we're not there, we're not there. People have camera traps now, and so you can watch chimps remotely in that way. It's really kind of extraordinary. I mean, when I went to Gombe, I was... Oh, wait a minute. I need to plug my computer in. I thought it was plugged. Sorry. What's extraordinary about the chimps at Gombe and other places where people have habituated them is that after all, they just don't take any notice. We try very hard not to interact with them. And so they really don't even look at us most of the time. They just go about their business. But that's not true for all of them. And especially, for example, new young females who've come in from somewhere where they've never seen people or been close to people before, they are shy. And that it takes them a while to get used to people. So we hope that we really aren't having a big effect on their behavior. And most of the time they behave as though we're really not doing much. It's kind of like a friend, you know, they treat us as a friendly cow or something.
It's like a reality show. They eventually ignore the cameras.
Right.
Next question. What does the term habituated mean? Use that term several
times. Oh, habituated. What that means is that they have become used to, I've used it in the sense of becoming used to people. So that originally they were really scared. Then as they came every day and ate bananas and there were people there, they stopped paying attention to people. And that's what I mean by habituation. It's kind of a biological term too. I mean, if you hear a clock ticking, you eventually stop hearing it. And that's called habituation as well.
From our own rabbi, considering aggression, is the etymology of aggression different in chimps and humans? I'm wondering if chimps seek social dominance while humans seek dominance of limited resources, i.e. we have an economic motivation.
Oh boy. I think humans are aggressive as well as, I mean, there's a lot of posturing and there's even fighting that goes on in humans, which I would call aggression. Can you gain status without showing any of that? Yeah, probably you can in humans and probably not in chimps. Does that get to the question? Okay, he's muted. No, he's not.
He unmuted himself. Well, let's go on, Jonathan. We can come back to you.
Well, I was wondering, it seemed that chimps don't have limited resources.
Oh, well, if that's what you came away with, that's not true. They do have limited resources. And what I would argue is that space with food in it is a limiting resource. And we have found that I showed you that the community range changed a lot over our study period. We were able to show that when the community range was really small and a lot of chimps were squeezed into a small space, the females gave birth that they had much longer interbirth intervals. We were actually weighing them at the time because while we were still feeding bananas, we had this spring balance and a rope attached to it, and they would climb up the spring balance and weigh themselves. And we found that all the chimps were lighter during periods when the community range was small. And so that was evidence that, they were not getting enough to eat because their territory wasn't big enough to support them so well.
Next question. Craig Packer, is he the lion expert that shows up on Nova every now and then?
Yeah, I forgot to say that, yes, we eventually were married for 20 years and we studied lions, and he is the lion expert. I dispersed again from Minnesota to Duke after a while.
Yeah. Next question. How do you define the core areas for individuals? Tracking with tags or following human individuals, or follows individuals?
By following them. So as I showed you, every time we follow them, we just mark. Well, now we use GPS. We used to mark on a map every 15 minutes where they were. We've digitized all of that information, so now we can use all kinds of techniques to draw lines to estimate the areas that different chimps spend most of their time in. And so that's a core area, and we do it from those sightings.
Got it. Next question. If the mother is still alive, is there no competition for food with adult daughters?
Yeah, that's a good question. There is. I mean, and one of the striking things, I spend a lot of time watching mothers and their daughters. Daughters were always, gave deference to their mothers. And mothers were pretty nasty to them. They would take their termiting tools. They would take their fruit when they were juvenile adolescents. But they also hang out a lot together. So yes, I think there is some competition, but the mother and daughter together sometimes chase other females around. And so they keep them out of their best areas sometimes. And so
depend on the amount of food, because I was assuming when you started discussing this that would be the reason the daughters left,
because they're competing with their mom.
Yeah,
but they're competing even more with other females. Their mom is more tolerant than other females are. So when they go into a new group, they have to really struggle and carve out an area, and they're pushed around by other females.
Would that depend on the food area being big enough for two breeding females, though?
Yeah, and so I think, well, these core areas overlap. It's not that they're exclusive sort of territories for each female. They all overlap, but the females who spend most of the time in there probably are the ones who get to the fruit first and will sometimes chase others out of that area. A mother and daughter together can do that better than a single female. But at the same time, you're right. There's if the daughters stay, then they're competing with their mom for that food.
Next question. When the female chimps leave their group, do similar number come in and maintain the balance of the group? Do males sometimes reject females that have come in?
Males never reject females that come in. The females try to reject them. Yes, so there's a balance. I mean, females in general, okay, let's see. Gombe, as you could see, was a pretty small place. We really only have 3 communities. They used to be connected to forested land all outside the park, but that's become more and more agricultural. There is a small group of chimps further north, but those females have to come through agricultural land to get to Gombe, yet they still do it. In fact, we've had some new ones just recently. But if you look at chimps that have been studied in larger, more intact forests with a lot of social groups, the females are just, yes, all the females from one group most of the females from one group will leave and join other groups, and new females come in from the surrounding groups. And so the balance, the number of females remains about the same. And the males love new females.
Next question from Vicky. It's very general. What is the big topic in chimp field research these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a bunch of my graduate students are continuing to study the chimps at Gombe. And there are chimps being studied in a number of other long-term studies. One of the sort of abiding questions is who cooperates with who, what forms, who forms strong social bonds. I mean, we know kinship's important. Brothers do definitely hang out together, but there are other males who form very strong friendships which last for years and years. So some of my students are looking at, well, what happened? Is it who you grew up with? Is it who your mom was friends with? So those are some of the questions. More general questions have to do with, you know, how do childhood experiences influence your success in later life? So if you have early adversity, like your mom dying, or a younger sibling very close in age, do you do worse? My colleague Susan Alberts here at Duke, who studies baboons, has done a lot of work in that regard, and we're looking at those sorts of things in the chimps as well. So cooperation, hunting, we're looking at disease, we're of course interested in anything to do with conservation as well. So a number of different things.
Next question. So you mentioned that some species, the females leave, other species, the males leave. Is there any theory of why there's that difference, or is it just random?
Well, yeah, it's not just random. And so if we look at animals in general, vertebrates in general, we now have data from lots of different species. And so we can generalize that in birds, it's almost always the males who stay close to home, and it's the females who move. There are some exceptions. Ducks and geese are exceptions. But in mammals, the big generalization is that females stay home and males leave. And then we have the sort of exceptional cases like chimps. So those general, people have tried and are still debating the sort of general explanations for those different patterns. And so, for example, with birds, people argue that males, especially if you think about migratory birds, males are the ones, they come back first. They establish the territories, and the females come and choose a good spot or choose a good male. The argument there is that males have an advantage from coming home to the place they know. They're better able to set up a good territory. Sure. Ducks, they're the exception because females are the ones who come back first. And they know where the good nesting spots are. The males then come and mate with them. They mate with the males, but then they go off and nest in the same spot every year. So that's kind of why birds are that way. Mammals are the other way, maybe because in general, there's strong competition among males for females. And in a lot of social species, you can have groups of females and just one male. They're polygynous. In that case, you know, at least some males have to leave. And so a general explanation that a lot of people think matters is that there's greater male-male competition than there is female-female competition, and that makes males go further.
So, Anne, I'm thinking we should not go on forever. So I'm
oh wow, yeah.
8:15. is when we'll stop, if that's okay with everybody. And I've got a bunch of questions, so let's just barrel through them. From Buck, is there bullying among chimps?
Is there what? Bullying?
Yes.
Well, would you like to define bullying for me? I mean, I kind of know what bullying is. I'm trying to, yes, I mean, there is bullying among chimps in the sense that they pick on each other, and weak ones get picked upon more. But as long as the weak ones are subservient, you know, dominance hierarchies can be pretty stable. And if everyone kind of accepts their place, then things are quite peaceful. Okay. But things that, you know, young males grow up and they stop being bullied after a lot of them get out from under being bullied.
Okay, next question. Does the word champ come from chimp?
Not as far as I know.
Next question. Did the baboons practice the same interbreeding practices as the chimps?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that Craig looked at early on when he was trying to figure out why these males were leaving, he looked at the males' behavior in the group they were born in before they left. And he found that they never mated with their mothers. They sometimes mated with their sisters, and sisters didn't like to mate with their brothers. And the males, in baboons, it's a little bit different from chimps in that the females also have these big sexual swellings. When the female has a large sexual swelling, males compete to consort with her. And that means one male gets to hang out with that female. He trails her all day long, mates with her, and keeps all the other males away. So that requires quite a bit of competition with other males. Males sometimes get wounded when they're fighting over females. Wow. And Craig found that young males, even when they got pretty large before they left, they could even be as large as the largest males in the group before they left. They did not compete for the females in their group. And so he interpreted that as being, you know, it's just their kin. It's better to go somewhere else and mate with non-kin.
Next question. How much do chimps sleep?
Well, they get into their nest at sunset and they get out of their nest at sunrise. Now, people have, a few brave people, not me, have spent all night under a nest to try to figure out what's going on. And we don't really know if they're sleeping, but they probably are sleeping most of the time. Sometimes they're not in the nest when you go back on the next day. And when I first lived there, the houses were everywhere. They were up in the forest, which was fantastic. We'd sleep in the forest. You'd hear the chimps at night. And sometimes they'd really be moving around. But mostly we think they probably sleep 12 hours a day.
That sounds great. Next question. Does the alpha male break up fights or disputes?
Yeah, he does. He especially breaks up female-female disputes. Yes, and he'll sometimes break up males attacking females as well.
Last question. Has anybody done comparative bonobo and chimps? You know, how their societies are very different.
Yeah. There's a lot of interest in bonobos, and they're really there are a lot of fascinating differences. Right. They look the same. They look quite similar. Bonobos are kind of more gracile. They're more delicate. They have higher voices. So there's a lot about that people talk about them having been juvenilized in some ways during their evolution. Females have a lot more power in bonobos than female chimps do. And in fact, and the alpha female seems to control to some extent which females get to mate with the alpha male. Or with her, if her son is the alpha male. So it's fascinating kind of stuff where for some reason, and for reasons which are under great dispute and discussion, females have more power. They gang up on the males in ways that female chimps don't.
Last question. Do the chimps ever vary from their expected gender norms and behaviors?
Yeah, I was just talking with Jonathan about that before, earlier tonight. We've had a couple of chimps, females, who were sterile, there was one in particular Jane wrote quite a bit about. Gigi, where if you saw her from the front, she looked like a male, but if she turned around, she had this huge sexual swelling. She hung out with the boys, but she did mate. She mated a lot. There's another female who is, I guess, who died recently, Sifa, who I didn't really know, but my graduate students told me a lot about her. And she was pretty aggressive, and she would mount females. But she also mated with males. And they weren't particularly attracted, they didn't mate with her that much, and she never had babies. So it was we don't know what, we don't know anything about their biology, but those are our observations.
Last question. So what have you learned in your 11 years of observations of Solterra?
Wonderfully stable marriages.
Thank you so much. We've got 3 minutes. I'm just going to unmute everybody and we'll have a free-for-all.
I see Jonathan's hands up, so I have to answer.
And your career has intersected with the lives and careers of a lot of very eminent people. I wonder if there's anybody in particular that you admire. You have a hero.
Hero. Well, of course, I mean, Jane is amazing how she has kept this study going and made people care about these chimps. So Jane is definitely a leading light in the field. My advisor, David Hamburg, who was at Stanford, and he was the head of the human biology program, who made it possible for the undergraduates to go to Gombe, work at Gombe. He was fascinated by human evolution, but he eventually went on to become head of the Carnegie Corporation and do a lot of good in the world. And so he was another hero of mine.
Upstairs, I guess.
We got 2 minutes for anybody with any final questions.
So Jane, or Anne, I should say, what the chimpanzees obviously didn't get a PhD in mating or not, how not to mate. What do you suppose, is this just a God-given idea? You don't mate within your own tribe, and we've certainly lost that somehow in Europe with the royalty. We didn't learn from it. How do you suppose they learn?
Actually, I dispute that that humans generally mate with their kin. They don't.
No,
I mean, and there's a huge disgust. I mean, talk to anyone here, they probably don't want to mate with their kin. And so that it's a very inborn thing, and it's very prevalent across most animals that they don't mate with their kin. In species, I mean, this has been something I've been interested in for a long time, which is sort of inbreeding avoidance mechanisms and what they are and how they evolve. And I mean, I think that, if you look at over evolutionary time, individuals that did mate with kin had poor reproductive success. They didn't leave many of their genes in future generations. Those who didn't mate with kin did better, and those behaviors are the ones that have spread in the population.
Yeah, you only have to look at the Spanish monarchy, which eventually died out.
Yeah. I mean, the monarchy situations are really interesting. I mean, the Egyptians, the Incas. I mean,
hemophilia was the big one, right?
And the idea, I think the prevalent explanation for those is that that's a way of concentrating power and keeping things in the family and maintaining the possession of the top position, but it has its problems. Yeah, if you have a lot of puny babies, then that's not going to last forever. I think there's all sorts of fascinating sort of stories about, well, who are the kids actually, and who were the parents of the kids, even though there's royal marriage.
We've reached 8:15. Let's all thank Anna again, and this was just one of the best Zoom talks we've ever had.
Thank you so much. That was
Thanks.
awesome.
Well, it was fun. It was kind of weird not being able to see anyone while I talk, but that's okay.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been recorded and I will post it on YouTube tomorrow. It takes about a day to process. And if any of you have any objections to recording it, let me know soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ann. It's
Great.
great.
Thank you, Brand.
Ann. It was
Thanks, everyone. It's great to see you all from Minnesota.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks, Ann.
Oh, hi, Jean. Great.
That's
Fascinating.
fascinating.
Okay.
All right. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Ann.